Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters.
Howdy, hey, howdy. Good to see you all again.
What happened to greetings?
I don't know.
Look forward to my greetings, my cretin.
I heard that there's somebody that was, I made somebody sad by calling them a cretin. So
You're kidding.
not entirely.
Was somebody really a cretin and they were ashamed to be called out for it?
I don't know. Yeah, but they felt it was inappropriate. And I thought, well, there's a lot of good people out there in our audience. They're not all cretins. Don't want to imply
They're
that.
not all. I mean, it's maybe a 50-50,
Yeah.
80-20. I don't know. Was the cretin in question? Was it our good friend John Blickman?
No, it wasn't. He's quite
Wow.
he's quite used to being called worse. So that was
Right. And on this show. And the amazing thing is he's been called worse on the show, which he sponsors. He actually pays for, so you don't have to. So you might want to take a moment of your time, check out blickmanengineering.com, or when you're down at your favorite homebrew shop, ask them about Blickman gear, if they've got any for sale there. The Anvil products, that's also a line that comes from the genius of John Blickman. Also, it's all quality stuff, including they do pro level brewing equipment now. Yeah. So
turnkey pro systems.
Yeah, it brings the same genius that he did to homebrewing to the professional level. So check him out, blickmanengineering.com. Send John a nice email telling him, even though he's a cretin, you still love him for paying for the show. So feedback at blickmanengineering.com. All right. Today, we have my dear friend, Dr. Chris White on the show from White Labs, which if you brew any beer, I'm sure you heard about. Chris White is the founder and spiritual leader of White Labs, which is the foremost supplier of yeast for craft brewers and home brewers worldwide. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Good. Hello. Thank you.
Excellent to have you on the show.
It's a lot of fun to be on the show. I appreciate it for the invitation and look forward to some fun and information.
Very good.
Yeah, we were actually got together and started talking, and I just think, we started talking about yeast related stuff. I'm thinking, the gems of information that are coming from this man, we ought to capture that on a show, so
exactly
so our listeners can enjoy it as well. So my first question for you, Chris, is you recently budded yourself. Your beautiful daughter River, and does that make you feel more in tune with yeast now that you have budded, or with people? Which do you identify more with, humans at this point?
Well, she's not a clone, so maybe I don't feel as close to bud to yeast, but I did really appreciate the biology of what was going on.
There you go.
Yes.
The ancient biology of the whole process and the baby. And it's just incredible.
And does Jamie have a bud scar from budding?
Kind of, yes. Forever.
See? And that's how it works. Even humans get a little bud scar from budding a new human.
Yeah.
Well, and congratulations.
Yes.
Thanks, guys. It's about 3 months now, so it's been awesome.
To us, cool. It makes you seem more human, I think. I'm not sure.
I'm part of the club now, huh?
Yes.
Part of the sleep deprived.
All right. Few odd questions. I was just knocking out some questions, things that people a lot of times ask me, and different questions than I usually ask you and we usually talk about. For example, what White Labs yeast has won the most awards in brewing competitions?
Well, that's an interesting question. And thinking about what you said, people might not realize that, or that when we get together and hang out, we still talk yeast. You know,
That's true.
and,
What else? What
you know,
else
when we
we
wrote
got?
the book, it was fun, and we're still doing it 10 years later. And
Well, we want to write the second book too.
that's right. And I would say it's our California Ale yeast, WP001, first strain on the White Labs menu in 1995, and the only one for about 3 years. And it's still our top seller. It's an awesome strain. And then when when IPAs really started to become popular, people realized it was a great strain for IPAs, and it's just kept getting more popular and more popular. I mean, we got a big menu of 80 core strains, plus the vault strains, all the specialty strains under the vault label. But California Ale yeast still continues to win the most medals and be used in the most beers.
Now, right, because it's used in a lot of beers. I mean, a huge amount of beer is brewed with that yeast strain. Now, but is there like another yeast strain out there that people are maybe not so aware of, not using in such volume, but every time somebody, brews something with it, it's so great that it can't help but be an award winner. That's what people want to know. They want the secret. They want the secret sauce.
There's a few probably, and I wouldn't just say one. And we really like WLP008, our East Coast ale yeast. It was also one of those early strains, but no one ever wanted to buy it on the commercial scale. Homebrewers would, but because it was too cloudy, it wouldn't flocculate, right? But now all of a sudden it's real popular because hazy beers are popular. And this is a yeast strain that you don't have to do anything with to make a hazy beer. It's cloudy. So it's real easy to use, and it has a stable haze and a delicious beer.
Right.
And a lot of people, when they think hazy, they want to use our London Fog yeast and the Burlington yeast. But our brewer at White Labs Brewing Company just wants to use 008 every time.
Right, because it's a nice steady fermenter, it's reliable, and it's a relatively clean fermenting yeast as well.
Yeah.
Ester profile wise, it's not as heavy in esters as some of the others.
Another one I like, it's not, people don't think of using the blends a lot, but WP 060, the American Ale yeast blend. It's just it's got a nice complement of clean yeast strains. It can make a lager-like beer real easily. And it also has some of that 001 component that gives the crispness. And, I don't think a lot of people go to think of that blend right away, but that's one of my favorites. And then Bedford Ale yeast is nice. 006, that's a vault strain. And then Mexican lager yeast, WLP 940, is one of my favorite lager strains we have.
So what's your most underappreciated yeast, do you think? Which one did you come up with that you thought, oh, this is fantastic, this is really cool, this is, a lot of people are going to see how cool this is and they're going to enjoy it, and then just like crickets? You were like,
at one of the homebrew cons a couple of years ago, we did a little special release of kind of the Frankenstout blend, where we make a beer with 96 yeast strains at White Labs Brewing Company, and we call it Frankenstout. It's a 9.5% beer with all this complexity from the 96 yeast strains. And so we did this little release of that blend, and it didn't do anything. And we did it at that trade show, and I thought people would be excited about it, but people were kind of like, well, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? And so nobody really used it. And so I thought that was going to be something that would be a hit.
It seems like there would be a huge amount of work in that too.
Yes. So we weren't really sure we would keep doing that, anyway, but it's a lot of work to make that culture when we do the beer. It's a lot of work to do it when we did the special release. But all the blends are a little bit difficult to time the yeast at the same, day and freshness.
Right.
It's not just about the components, but it's about having them made that day.
Right. Because if you got to make 96 yeasts.
Yeah.
Are you still doing the 96 yeast blend?
No, no, we did it as a little one-off to see if people
Right.
were interested in it, and it didn't seem to be. People didn't seem to be very interested in it. But there's others that have kind of come, and like the Mexican lager yeast that I mentioned. You know, I put it, you know, released it, and then I would take it off and release it, and I'd have to put it in vault. But it started gaining a small fan base that recognized how awesome that strain was, and easy to use that strain was. But I think it's the name a little bit. People were like, Mexican lager yeast, you know, we understand the politics and things, but they're like, well, how can that be a great yeast strain? You know, it's not German or whatever. But see, all these strains were were derived from Europe.
German. Yeah.
Yeah. And people kept telling me to change the name, and I like the name. So I kept the name. And maybe it sells less because of it.
When you're looking for a new yeast strain, what is it that kind of drives your choice of a new yeast strain? How, you know, where are you finding these things? And two, it's not from your COVID beard, your isolation beard.
Right.
Where are you finding them? And you know, what kind of analysis, what's the breakdown of the analysis when you find something, you go, well, this might be interesting, you know, and you captured it off of something or played it off of something, or somebody's given it to you, or, and then, you know, what's the steps that, you know, the general steps that you guys go through in the lab to and the sensory that makes you say, yeah, this is something, or this is nothing.
Yeah, collecting new yeast strains is an active part of what we do. We're all beer fans involved, you know, like everybody works at White Labs. I mean, you're not going to like working at White Labs if you're not a beer fan, because it's a hard job, and it's an important job making these pure yeast cultures. So, you know, we've got great people that care about this industry, and so and wine and other things. So, you know, we're constantly collecting, and we've got a well-equipped lab, a microbiology lab, an R&D lab, a bacteria lab, analytical testing lab with all the chemistry goes on. So between all those labs, we have a lot of the resources to really work a yeast strain through some laboratory work. And it's about a 3-month process. And it's finding a good yeast strain is a needle in a haystack. There is so many, I mean, the air is full of yeast and bacteria, but very, very few can make the kind of beer we'd like that's not phenolic, that ferments the maltose, beer is really unique. And that's why most of the yeast strains we use are quite ancient, but they've gone through different kinds of mutations. And so finding those around brewery areas or from old beers or from old yeast banks. I mean, we still get a lot from yeast banks, but we still have to run it through that 3-month process.
Yeah.
And then do a lot of selection. So what's done normally today in this kind of selection is robotics. But say a pharmaceutical company is looking for a particular yeast or bacteria to do something, it's screened through high throughput screening through robotics. That's something we don't have. So we just do the old school manual process of colonies after colonies.
And do you look for like attenuation, or do you look for, you know, other particular characteristics that say, like when you're say we need a new fruitier yeast, or we need a new higher attenuating yeast? I mean, what kind of drives that process?
The first thing is attenuation. Yes. So if somebody was going to do this at home and you collected some yeast in your backyard or area, you know, and you said, is this something good? Well, I would put it on a Petri dish. I have certain things I look for in a Petri dish. I'd look at a microscope, but then the very next thing I'd do with it, once I felt it was pure and had the correct kind of colony characteristics, would be to do an attenuation in 12-degree wort. And if I don't get that, you know, normal 70-ish, whatever percent attenuation, because a lot of those things will only do 20, 30, 40, it's just a no-go. It may be something, if it's a low attenuator, to keep exploring as a mixer kind of thing, and maybe a blend. But if it doesn't attenuate, it's not going to be good for brewing by itself, and it's possible that it could be dangerous. All right, so if it doesn't attenuate at all, don't even try it. But if it survives some alcohol and keeps going, then you've probably got something that's non-pathogenic. And that's why early screening with attenuation is really important, actually, even for safety.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused there. If it looks like a yeast on a petri dish or under a microscope, then it wouldn't be pathogenic, right?
No, there's lots of pathogenic yeast and bacteria. Yeah, just none that can survive the pH and the alcohol of beer wort.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's like mushrooms, it's like you just bite the wrong one. Same thing with yeast strains. There's tons that are bad for you, but the ones we use and the ones that can survive in beer wort are good.
Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting.
Well, yeah, that's fascinating. Let's do this. Let's take a short break. When we get back, we will have more questions for Dr. Chris White right after this. All right, we're back. We're talking with our good friend Chris White from White Labs. Casey was asking, do you still offer the Franken yeast blend? And we answered that just a moment ago. Unfortunately not. There wasn't enough interests. But see, different day, different time. Maybe there's still a chance for the Franken yeast blend. I would brew something here with it if you were to come back with it. I think
okay.
Did something.
Yeah, a microbiology company, scientists, maybe not the best marketers. So possibly we just put the message out wrong.
Right. Well, speaking of blends, I mean, like your American Ale yeast blend, when you created that blend, what characteristics were you interested in blending to create that product?
I was trying to get something kind of that would make a beer from a sensory perspective of like a golden ale, a lager, a Kolsch that would also work in an IPA.
Okay.
A robust mix that gave, that kind of blended hybrid kind of character.
Okay.
So Mayora is asking, why is Kveik not a mainstream yeast?
Mainstream. Well, I think there's two things. First of all, they're pretty new. They're old. Hybridization events a long time ago to create these yeasts that can ferment warmer with clean flavors, but still have brewing yeast DNA that were recently discovered by the rest of the brewing world. And the Norwegian farmers and folks have been awesome at letting that get spread through yeast companies like ourselves, and people try them. But if you do a side-by-side with California Ale yeast or so, it's California Ale yeast still produces the beer I would expect. The ester characters, the beautiful crispness, and the Kveik strains are a little rougher around the edges, and that's okay. They're a little muted on the esters, which is not really something that you'd select for. But what people really get excited about is the high temperature fermentation. And to me, that's a little bit of a devilish thing kind of hanging over it. Like, you want to use me, I'll be fast, but I'm not going to give you the flavor that you used to have. And I saw that not in my lifetime, but it's happened with baking. It's happened with distilling. It's happened with wine, even, where they used to use all these interesting yeast strains that it created all these great flavors. And they've mostly gone away from those things. And the generation of winemakers and bakers and stuff today don't even use that language of flavor so much that they used to with yeast, or not even know that there's an impact because it's already been moved on. And so, but that was all about speed. Baker's yeast used to take 3 days, but all the great flavors you'd get in the dough because it takes time. And now we have, doughs rising in a few hours from more simple strains that have been breeded to do that, and flavors just left behind. And I would hate for that to happen to brewers just because we were chasing speed.
I took a distilling class, and when I think distilling this, they were like, yeah, just throw in a brick of yeast, 93 degrees, let it rip. It should be done by the next day, and then you can start distilling. It's like, I'm like, well, don't you care? That was their sum total information about fermentation. I'm just like, how about rehydrating the yeast? And they're like, oh, no, it's just a waste of time and money. It's like, it's a bucket of warm water in 15 minutes. And then they were like, no. And then they're like, well, somebody asked, what if it doesn't, ferment? It's like, throw in another brick of yeast. that was their solution. I'm just like, it's an old school dude who's been doing it for 40 years or whatever. And it's like, I appreciate that you have this knowledge, but I think, the mindset of a lot of distillers is, well, we'll fix it in the distillation. We'll fix it then. It's like, well, why not fix it in your fermentation so that what you're distilling is much nicer, has more interesting flavors, your yields more, instead of getting a whole bunch of, acetone, you get, a higher quality, product. But, and I think that's happening more and more nowadays with people getting into craft distilling, people from craft beer. But I see what you're saying, that I keep hearing from people, well, I can just use Kvike yeast to make a lager. I don't need, I'm like, no, you need lager yeast. If you want to make a lager, you actually need lager yeast. You can make something lager-like, but it's still not a lager. It doesn't really taste like a lager. I've never found anything, even the high-pressure lager fermentations, I didn't think tasted perfectly lager-like.
That you really nailed it right there from a sensory perspective. I think that's what happens sometimes. People say, oh, it's just the same. But when you do the sensory, it's not the same. You're missing some key nuances of the lager characteristics. And I think that's the same when we talk about these other yeast strains. And it's similar to the discussion of dry yeast and liquid yeast, where, if somebody says, oh, it's the same. It's not the same. And that's not to bash dry yeast. It's much less expensive. It's much easier to move around. I might make or sell dry yeast someday, but that doesn't mean that liquid yeast, if you do the sensory, is not going to have the esters are much higher in liquid yeast. They export those esters better to the expected level. Yeah, it's a little harder to use. It's more expensive, but it makes the best beer flavors.
I agree 100%. Right. That's what you're trying to achieve anyways. Why are you doing all this? Even as a homebrewer, why are you doing all this? Just go buy some commercial beer. It's much cheaper than brewing your own. I mean, you're doing it because you want to make the best beer in the world.
That's right.
All right. So you were talking about how there's lots of deadly yeasts out there. Which brings me to a question that I'm sure will raise some controversy here. Is your thoughts on GMO yeast? I believe that they're generally safe, but I haven't used any in any of my beers. I guess somebody could theoretically make a yeast that had some sort of pathogenic qualities to it. So, and I bring this up because I just recently found out that a number of local breweries are using GMO yeast. And I thought, for me, I would have to let my customers know. Not that I would think there was anything wrong with it. I drank some beers made with GMO yeast. I don't care. But I know people do care. And so I would never make anything with the GMO yeast without telling people. I think, do you feel the same way, Chris? Or am I, it just seems a little sketchy not to say something at this point in time.
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and I don't think we've really talked about it, but I do have some opinions on that. And it's not about it being dangerous.
Right, because I don't think it is, but people have that perception.
I would say we don't know, right? Long term, because you can't just say it's not doing something if you understand biochemistry and immunology and protein folding, enzyme kinetics. If you truly recombinant organisms are taking a gene out of, and there's different ways of doing this, of course, now, but taking a gene out of one species or type of organism and putting it into another. The very first GMO pharmaceutical product was Genentech, its creation, when they took a gene, the human insulin gene, and inserted it in bacteria. Then they grew up the bacterial culture, like we would do in beer or something, but they harvested the insulin that got exported from the cell, and that was sold as human insulin. Big advantage in pharmaceuticals for recombinant things. A lot of our medicines now are based on GMO, and I think that's incredibly powerful for the world. Now you move it to food and beverage, and there's a reason to be a little more cautious, because that gene that you put in the other organism, you're not really there's great ways now of not messing up the genetics, but that protein product from a gene can fold a little differently in the other cell, and when it gets exported, it can get wrapped in things differently, like sugars and stuff. So, and the smallest epitopes on a protein spots cause big differences in the human body. It's the whole basis of immunology. It's why we're talking about the COVID vaccine and a mutation. Well, maybe now the vaccine won't work against a mutation that happens next year. So that being said, I'm just saying there's reasons to have some discussion, but you can say, okay, it's generally safe. But for the industry to kind of, I always expected when it happened, it probably happened fairly quickly, but I was a little surprised by the non-transparency that you're speaking to, because beer and brewing has a wholesomeness of kind of what I was talking about earlier with our yeast strains and our patients. Our communication, our customers really demand that kind of transparency. They want to know where your beer's made. They want to know your ingredients and your story. And we put things on the label we legally don't have to. There's the whole food and beverage industry is pretty weird. Like, a lot of the rules exist just so they don't have to put something on the label. Well, craft beer consumers kind of care. So, you can see this playing out in all the plant-based products now, and all the lawsuits going on about somebody saying they don't want to put this on the label. They're just trying to sort of, in a way, deceive, right? But that's a pretty strong word. Or maybe just not inform somebody. And I think beer, as being wholesome, craft beer especially, needs to be careful not to upset customers and understand where our craft beer customer is coming from. So I have no problem with somebody making a GMO beer. We might make GMO yeast at some point, even though there's no GMO barley or hops right now, and yeast has been a part of that too. But I would say if you're going to make a GMO beer, put it on the label. Tell the customer. Don't lose this trust we've got. And that'd be my biggest message. And I've already been told, well, I don't have to put it on a label. I know that's because there's been all these lawsuits against it by the big food and beverage industry, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't put it on there. There's lots of things brewers put on their labels that they don't have to, but they're trying to communicate to their craft beer customer.
Yeah, it's weird. I wonder if there's going to be, some sort of eventual split in brewers where some are, going like, no GMO yeasts, used, and the others just won't say anything, kind of, I don't know. I got nothing against it. And I find the potential for it pretty amazing, but I just can't use it unless I have an easy way of communicating with my customer what's going on, just so that they can make a choice, an informed choice. And what amazes me is my understanding is that there's more people using, a GMO yeast that doesn't produce as much diacetyl or doesn't produce any diacetyl. It's like, well, I mean, why? I mean, really, it seems like something we already know how to deal with through regular brewing. I don't have any diacetyl issues. Why would that be the focus? Do you run into a lot of breweries that have diacetyl problems?
So when I do, we tell them how to fix it, and
Right.
and they learn how to fix it because the consumer rejects it. And so yeah, while the possibilities are basically limitless of what you could do with recombination, you have to ask, is it worth it? And that's why the big breweries haven't done it. It would make your yeast more expensive because then what you do, these things get commercialized, would be patented.
Right.
In the bigger scale, and then there'd be licensing agreements. They'd be more expensive for what, and so that's where I like to see what the imagination of the craft beer industry does, right? That's why we've got all these styles we have. And so maybe some uses could come out that are super unique and would make that worth it. But to do it for attenuation or diacetyl or hop flavor or something, I just doesn't seem enough yet to make it something that would be worth doing.
I could see doing it as a special, one-off and something that's cool, people that want to, I had a friend who wanted to taste beers that were made with a GMO yeast, and, just to say he tasted one.
Yeah.
So I guess, that's a possibility. Yeah. But I was just really taken aback by finding that there were some brewers who weren't that were using the yeasts and weren't saying anything to anybody.
I'd like a glow in the dark yeast.
Yeah.
And now, see, that would be cool. That I could really get behind.
Yeah.
And especially if when I was peeing, then it's the glow in the dark. Then at night, when you're staggering around the woods, which there's times all three of us have done that, and you need to pee, you can see where your pee's going.
There you go.
Peeing on your shoes.
Yeah, you'd want to drink that particular brewery's beer, right? Because right now it doesn't have to change color.
That's right.
That was an old joke from Yellow to Yellow, when it was all Budweiser. It was my old dad joke.
Yeah.
But so like I said, I've had some. I would drink some. I mean, I just try to provide some information why caution is okay and why people aren't crazy to be cautious. Right. But I have had some, and I just want to know. I think the whole food industry should label. I think it's kind of silly that it keeps getting held up in different courts and different things, and propositions get run in states, but then it gets turned down. Right. So I mean.
Just give the consumer some information. Let the consumer decide. What's the harm? That's why I hate those obscure date codes that they put. That don't. You just put the date it was packaged on, for God's sakes. Yeah. Simple as that. You don't have to do anything else. Just give the consumer some information and step away. Spy Brew is asking, how about a yeast for non-alcoholic beers?
Yes.
Do you see White Labs in that area in the years to come?
Yes, this year. We're already in it.
Okay.
We have some vault strains for non-alcoholic beers. And so what we're trying to do is make the vault a little easier to get yeast out of, because it's where we created this space for specialty yeast strains, but actually getting them produced and getting them distributed is a challenge we're still working on, and get them in homebrew stores easier. But we're making some progress. And so, yes, we have yeast for non-alcoholic beers in the vault now.
And how do they work? What sort of, attenuation and, fermentation should you expect from those? What kind of work do you put them in?
Yeah. Well, that's where, in the future or whatever, or, GMO might make sense. But because right now what you do is you select these yeast strains, like we list the species on there that don't ferment maltose. Mm-hmm. Great. So you get this low alcohol beer, but they have all the maltose, so they're a bit sweet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So while we have those strains and people are using them, and there's there's selling them to breweries, and breweries are making some of their non-alcoholic beers that way. I think there's too sweet. My preference.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you hop them a lot, huh?
Yeah, I mean, and that's why non-alcoholic beers for history, whatever, have mostly been sweet and even hopped and stuff. But people like that. I think non-alcoholic beers have an important place in our category, because people who don't want to drink alcohol, people who are driving, lots of good reasons for it. Pregnancy, different health conditions, and there's ways to slowly distill off the ethanol and not damage beer flavor. That's pretty common in Europe.
Would it be possible to engineer a yeast to produce water instead of alcohol?
Yeah.
Definitely. So we could potentially produce a yeast that would ferment the maltose, and produce some esters, but just not produce alcohol as a byproduct.
Yeah, for sure, because it's almost limitless of what you could engineer. There's genes out there in the life pool that do just about anything.
Huh. Well, that would be very interesting. Yeah.
There you go. Tour asks, what do you think about Heineken's H41 yeast? They claim it to be the mother of all lager yeasts, which supposedly makes a very unique beer with a fuller taste, spicy notes, and some fruity hints.
Is that the Ubiana strain?
Or
Heineken's
H41 yeast.
I remember seeing
John's
something.
Googling.
Yeah, I should have. It seems like something that I should have looked at a little bit more, but
I don't know. I actually have not heard of it. Of course, I've got my head stuck inside a brewery, which is like sticking your head in a pile of cow manure. For your ears get filled with all that poo, and you don't hear anything, and you don't pay attention to anything.
And you haven't drinking a lot of Heineken recently?
I have not. Do they make a special beer with it? Tour? Do they make have they made a beer and send a beer out, or did they just claim it's the mother of all yeasts? I suppose if you're still listening.
I believe it is the Ubianus. Yeah, they talk about Patagonia. They talk about being the parents of one of Pastorianus. So.
Okay, yeah, that's why kind of what I remember from the story. So making a beer with the Ubiana strain is an interesting endeavor. I've had some of the beers that have come out of Argentina with the Ubianus. With Ubianus, and you guys might have as well. And they're okay, but they're phenolic, because that's what's so special about brewer's yeast. That phenol negative mutation, 2 different places in the gene pool of brewer's yeast, has really made our beers taste awesome, and everything would be phenolic otherwise. And so when I taste something that, because phenol is so dominant, it's like, okay, the Ubianus is some phenols. Well, it's hard to get through something else.
Yeah.
But I haven't had the Heineken H41. Maybe they used a different strain of it, but from that description,
they say spicy notes, so often they mean phenols.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I'm not a big phenolic guy. In limited amounts, I can enjoy it. Some Belgian ales, I can enjoy it, but not to excess. I always like a yeast that has limited phenol expression.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because we're old homebrewers, and as old homebrewers, phenols was a sign you were doing something wrong.
Yeah, true.
Right, especially huge medicinal character.
Yeah,
and all that. Yeah. So going back to yeast, I still owe you a sample of the yeast that we captured here, the strain of Brett that we captured here that we can't identify as any of the other Bretts. So I'll have to send it to you and see if it is in fact truly unique. And if it is,
True, yeah.
That we can have a heretic yeast in the White Labs lineup. Is that a possibility?
Absolutely.
At least in the vault, in the in the
most
one
people
and
want to just
done.
keep that to themselves, but you'd allow your fans to get it.
Oh well, now that you mentioned that, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think we'd go for it. I think it'd be fun,
Yeah.
especially if it's something unique to hear, because that's one of the things you hear about. Yeast being unique to like the Seine Valley for lambics or other locations, and uh, you know it gets you thinking. Yeah, every little valley on the planet must be unique. Every little area must have its own unique yeast. Is that true, or is it much more? Oh, the yeast have eventually blown around the world and everything's the same.
No, no, no. When you look at especially if you do full genome sequencing of yeast, you can find some very regional differences. And that's what we did with the DNA sequencing paper that we did a few years ago in collaboration with a bunch of people and industry. And then we did a second one on lager yeast. So those papers did have over 100 strains fully genome sequenced, and other places, universities, things like that have done those studies, and they've, like in the wine region of Napa, for example, you find a different microbiology in different vineyards in that same valley that are consistent year after year after year. So those microbes stay in that little valley, creating that special wine because they're circulated by the insects in that little small region in the off season, and they don't seem to go down the road, enough to change that the microbiome there. So it's that same kind of story will be replicated throughout the valleys of the world and the breweries and things like that. That's why people do find that they get different yeast strains in their brewery, and ultimately that's why we have all the different strains we do today, even though these breweries weren't that far from each other. But they might have started with something similar, and then it turns into something different and stays different in their locations. And the different microbes that are around your areas are also different. So your Brett, likely, or I wouldn't say likely, it's got to be looked at, but it has a potential of being unique.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's what's so cool about spontaneous ferments and things like that. You imagine if we did that all over the world and plated everything out. I mean, imagine the amazing amount of yeast that we'd have to sort through to try and find something decent. It's kind of interesting that the history of brewing is a big part of that was just getting us great unique yeast that these brewers yeasts.
Well, it makes me think I should swab some flowers that I've seen bees brushing up against. If they hadn't thought about the insect vector, but
right,
yeah,
probably have lots of yeast hanging around.
Well, and actually, what happens inside the insects is hybridization. So that's where a lot of people think now, and some good evidence for that. Where's the hybridization happening in the nature? It's happening inside the bees and other insects that are carrying these things around.
I wondered about that. I mean, the whole Pastorianus, Eubianus question. How did this unique hybridization happen from Patagonia to Europe? And I guess one question is, is Eubianus that unique to Patagonia, or have we found it all worldwide now? And then how does hybridization occur? Does it occur spontaneously in a vat in the brewery? Or I had thought about the insect vector at all. So if it happens inside bees, then that certainly makes a strong case for it to be happening and a brewery's batch becoming inoculated, being open to the air kind of thing with a hybridized yeast.
Right. And then some kind of selection event has to kind of make it go somewhere. So it's been found in large amounts in Tibet as well. And so there's a lot of people who think that's a more likely
Silk
journey the yeast took. Exactly.
Okay.
And much older. But, people in Argentina haven't given up. Trying to, but it's from Argentina. Because there's a timeline that can make sense with the discovery of the New World by Europe and the transport back and forth of materials, and all in wooden ships, and lots of microbes and organisms transferred continents. So it's possible either way that this Eubayanus got to southern Germany and was hanging out in some wood and some brewing caves. There's some open fermenting lager beer there with some yeast that probably took a long time to ferment, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. I'd imagine the brewer came back one day and one beer was done and the rest weren't. And they said, what the heck? Tasted it. It was good. Said, I'm going to reuse that yeast. And, there was a hybridization that happened nearby and then it was selected for in that beer, and then it was reused and shared over the next 50 years, 100 years. And then that's the only yeast they used. And then it would continue to mutate in other areas, Northern Europe, Southern, and we get kind of a variety of strains we have now.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, it makes you wonder too if mead wasn't a possible vector as well. Bringing some honey back from the New World, and that using that honey in a brew, or exposure to the bee, of that honey to the hives, and I guess speculation. Anyway, but that is fascinating. Is making hybrids in the lab fairly easy now? Could you start breeding your own?
And that's why we haven't been able to replicate lager yeast in the lab, right? That hybridization, even knowing Eubayanus now. So it's really hard. And that's why people were going like, well, how is this happening in nature? And so the insect theory and evidence so far is really kind of giving some relief to a lot of scientists going like, oh, okay, here's something that makes sense in how this happens in nature, because why can't we replicate that in the lab? Well, we know biological systems are extremely complex with different pHs and pressures, all sorts of things going on, and components in close proximity. So the hybridizations are difficult to do. But my belief, even before we did those papers or other things, that most of the yeast out there are hybrids. I mean, we knew lager yeast we didn't know about Eubayanus till more recently, but Belgian strains, of course, are hybrids, right? That was my thinking. And the different strains. And it turns out from our couple of papers on the family tree of yeast, and then the more focus on the lager yeast, they're all hybrids, one way or the other. So lots of hybrids, and sometimes just mutations. Not everything is hybrid. I'm being a little dramatic there, but there's lots.
Okay. I'll tell you where you can find lots of White Labs yeasts. Check out our good friends at Brew Chatter, brewchatter.com. They're up in near Reno and Sparks there, and they've got a wide selection of all the White Labs yeast. And I'm sure even if you wanted to order something special, they'd help you out with that. They're really sweet guys, really nice, know a lot about brewing, have a clean quality shop. So check them out, brewchatter.com. Nice folks, Josh and RJ. Check them out. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more questions for Dr. Chris White right after this. All right, we're back. We're talking with Chris White from White Labs, dear friend of both John and myself. And he's so kindly agreed to spend an hour out of his extremely busy day talking with us about yeast. He's always a fascinating guest. Keith was asking, can you comment on your research experience of lager yeast temperature pitches? Pitching warmer until fermentation is visible and then dropping the temp, versus pitching at or below fermentation temp and allow it to naturally rise to fermentation temp.
Well, the easy part of that answer is they both work, right? And so if you want to start with ale kind of pitching rates, which you start at ale like temperatures, 68, and when you add the yeast, they're not making these flavor compounds yet. So that's why you have a little window until, yeast start they start consuming the sugars, they start making ethanol, they make fusel alcohols, they start making esters. So we kind of say in that 12-hour window, you basically, when fermentation starts, if it starts in 4 hours, it's not, that's your window. You're just saying that when you see active signs of fermentation, you can start lowering it, because now the yeast are generating heat. They're not really going to be as affected by this temperature change. But that's very different than just say adding the yeast to 68 and going, oh, I better drop it. Well, you're just going to arrest the yeast cells at that point. You got to get the metabolism going. And then taste the beer. If you think it tastes just like the lager you like, because you didn't make a lot of these components first, then that's a great way to go and an awesome way to start a lager. If you feel that, it's a little too less lager-like than I want, then pitch at a lager pitching rate. You just have to have a lot of yeast. And a lot of people throw out, oh, just use twice as much. No, it's not just twice as much. It depends on the gravity and everything. But, you need a lot more yeast, because it depends on your ale rate. If twice as much is right? You might be at a very low ale rate, so twice as much is not going to be there. And that's why I say you can't just use a general term like that. We're building a new calculator for our website that has a lot to do with gravity and temperature that we'll have next year.
There's so many little parameters that, people want generalizations as to what works, what doesn't. And you can give generalizations. Well, this will work, that'll work. And then they're like, well, how do I make the best beer possible? It's like, well, okay, that's a whole different question.
Yeah.
Or, how, what does, this factor, and a lot of it for me is you got to brew a beer multiple times and you've got to try little adjustments and, see which gives you the best result. That's the only way to really know, because there's so many complexities. Yeah, experience over time allows you to, guess at certain, ways that things will work. But even then, we'll brew beers and, right out of the bat, yeah, it's a nice beer, but I'm always like, I want to tweak a little bit on this, a little bit on that. We're constantly doing that. We're checking on Whirlpool hops earlier today, whether we could eliminate or substitute or, in a beer, and what, I did a blind triangle test just before the show. And man, it was so close. I actually picked the wrong beer in the triangle test, so I could not tell the difference between the three. And making that change will save us $35,000 a year.
Damn.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm like, all right, I'm keen on this one. I couldn't tell the difference.
So somebody doesn't have to get fired today. You just save $35,000, right? In a slowing economy.
Yeah, exactly.
No, nice job. But what you did was so important there. And I just hope everybody heard that. You experimented and you did the blind sensory. So like, in terms of this question, hey, which one should I do? Pitch this way or pitch this way? I want you to do both. I want you to determine, what you think into a blind tasting of both, not just take an advice one way or the other, because you may never go down the other road. And it was a good road to go down.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Do you have any other news about White Labs? What's been happening at White Labs? You guys seem like you're always growing, changing. Any new super secret strains coming out, or should we be preparing our Christmas shopping list for something new from White Labs?
I feel we've got a lot coming. We got a lot coming, because one of the things COVID was bad in lots of ways, lose some jobs, lose some revenue, all this stuff. But you make it. My staff has been awesome. And, but we have sort of not had the distraction of growth, capacity, growth increases, trade shows, all that kind of stuff. So we've just kind of hunkered down in Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting around these kind of tech teams. I have a whole program for it now. It's been a long journey to try to get to innovation, besides just an owner of some project versus a team. So anyway, I've got all these teams going, and I go to most of them through these Zoom meetings. And we've been able to use just through brain power, like put a lot of the things that we wanted to do, from some things like new website. Okay, great. Well, there'll be a new website, but also improvements to Vault, new yeast strains. We did some new Kvite strains too during this time release. We have other new strains coming in. Updates to Pure Pitch, some great updates, and that's going to make our homebrew package a lot, easier to use, and so much has gone into that, to the yeast quality itself, trying to make it better. And I'm excited. We've got a lot coming. We've had the tap room in San Diego has been closed, so we didn't just sit there with it closed. We worked on what can we do to make this better? Put a new draft system in, and outdoor seating, and so when we reopen, it's going to be a better experience. So we're just trying to use this time to make everything better in our company and roll into an awesome 21.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I think obviously there's ways to improve a company, but I think from the user perspective, from the customer perspective, a lot of times people don't realize that there are improvements that can be made in yeast, and it's subtle things, and it's better packaging, actually. And healthier yeast, and there's just so many things involved that I think sometimes we all look at yeast as a commodity at this point. It's like, oh no, well, the yeast is just it's a package, and here it comes, and just chuck it in. When there's a lot to it, and a lot of complexity that makes one yeast better than another. So it's really heartening to hear all the work that you guys are putting in.
Yes, it's true. I think a lot of people would think yeast is yeast, but there's so many ways to make yeast, and we're always trying to build a better cell, a more stable cell, a better cell wall, better physiology, longer shelf life that comes out of that. And so we have a super long process, a 21-day process from lab to clearing QC. And starting with those Petri dishes and freezes before that. So we've been doing that since day one, even though we've changed lots of things around the company, because it gives you a yeast cell that does have this great physiology. And now we're trying to say, okay, but we built the capacity. So, our commercial customers are still getting yeast usually in a day or two, but it could be longer for certain things they want. But we're using that same process. We're building on that process during this last year to say then, okay, how can we get the home brewer or the commercial brewer more yeast, right? That's, people want more cells. Okay, we'll get you more cells of this really healthy yeast.
Nice. Fantastic. Here, I think like I said, it's heartening to hear that the leader in high quality yeast for home brewers and craft brewers is he just keeps working on making it better and better and better. That's right. That's
continuous improvement.
Yeah. Quality is.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe someday, John, you and I will put some improvement into this show. We will.
Yeah, that's an idea.
Continuous improvement. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen. But what you can do to help us out is check out our fine sponsors. Check out Blickman Engineering, blickmanengineering.com. Check out the fine folks at Brew Chatter. Check out White Labs. They got a lot of information. You mentioned updating the website. There's a ton of great information on the website, new information. If you haven't been to the White Labs website recently, check it out. There's a lot more goodies there for you, and a lot more information on how to brew. Thank you very much, Chris, for spending the day with us, and we really appreciate it. I'm sure I'll see you next time you're in town. Yeah.
Yes, it was great, guys. Thanks. I enjoyed it. Even though we're not in the same room, this virtual is working, and I think it was a lot of fun. Anyway, seeing your faces.
Yeah, good to see you, Chris. Take care.
Thanks, brother. Bye-bye.
Bye.